All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, there has been plenty of moving and shaking today by the Boston Celtics, one of the more storied franchises in NBA history, as they have sent shockwaves around the basketball world. Now, first and foremost, after the Celtics were able to make the Eastern Conference Finals last year, they found themselves sent home in the first round of the playoffs this year by the Brooklyn Nets. And looking at the Celtics season, it never came together. They were 36 and 36 during the regular season. You look at how everything went down. Of course, Jason Tatum did missed some time due to positive test for COVID. We also saw Jalen Brown injured towards the tail end of the season, and of course, the Celtics did not have his services during their first round loss to the Brooklyn Nets, and that really changed things. I know that Kimball Walker averaged 19 points this season for the Celtics, but for whatever reason, it just never meshed for him, in my opinion. And for me, as a whole, as a team, things never simply came together. And then you hear other stuff that went on this today, as far as a shakeup with Danny Ainge, stepping down as the Celtics president of basketball operations, and Brad Stevens, the Celtics head coach, is now assuming that position. So this just didn't happen. This definitely was in the works. And you look at it and say, well, you know what? Maybe this back and forth, caused plenty of a distraction or two for this team all season long, because I know that the Celtics were a perimeter oriented team, but with that said, they still had enough talent, or they had more talent than what their record said. I mean, this was a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and actually in 3 of the last 4 years, the Celtics were in the conference finals. And it just, they just never really got out of their own way this year. But you look at it, you're going to look at Danny Ainge's tenure as the head coach, pardon me, the president of basketball operations for the Celtics. And I know that there are going to be some people that are going to question it, but I mean, you cannot question and overlook the consistency that the Celtics had under Danny Ainge. I mean, they won it all in 2008, of course, with that big three of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen. They were right in contention in each of the next 2 years. I always say, looking back at 2010, if Kendrick Perkins doesn't get that knee injury in the NBA Finals, things probably are a lot different. And then Danny Ainge realized in the early 2000s that, what, that veteran team was getting old and he had to start over from scratch. Doc Rivers left. He brought in Brad Stevens. Brad Stevens only won 25 games his first year around. And ever since then, the Celtics have been in the playoffs each year under Brad Stevens. So you know what? You see that, he has what it takes to make the playoffs. It's just the fact that the Celtics were never able to take that next step under Stevens. I know that there are some people that feel one way about the big trade that the Celtics made with the Brooklyn Nets, while others feel a different way, in regards to, look at the Nets now, look at the Celtics now. But at the end of the day, you can't understate what Danny Ainge did there. He got the two cornerstones of his franchise out of that trade. He got Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown via the NBA draft. I think the biggest mistake that Danny Ainge has made in the recent years, he's been unable to get that consistent front court presence. And that is what has hurt the Celtics in recent years from taking that next step, getting over that hump, and getting ultimately to the NBA championship. But, make no mistake about it, the Celtics definitely are a playoff team. But, you look at this roster, I know that there are going to be some people that say, you know what, you want to shake things up, you got to break things up. The thing is, you can rehaul the roster any way you want. But going forward, Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum still need to be there. I think what the Celtics have to do, they have to have more cohesiveness at the point guard position, and they need to find themselves a big who can score. Now, this is going to be interesting going forward because now Brad Stevens is transitioning to the front office. So first and foremost, he has to get a head coach that he's on the same level with. So we have to see what he's going to do from there. And it's funny, just before all of this came out, I was in that camp to ask, what, had Brad Stevens' style, worn on the Celtics? And now obviously not, because they wanted to keep him, and there's a part two to this that I'm going to get to later, and you're going to hear my theories on that as well. But I look at it like this: the Celtics definitely didn't want to lose Brad Stevens. They like his philosophy, they like his style, and they feel that they can win with him. As a coach, I think Brad Stevens' style is good for the NBA, not great. He'd be better served in college because the game is a little bit different. But the Celtics definitely need to find that interior presence. You look at it going forward, Stevens is going to have to figure out the cap. He has a lot of money that's tied up with both Jalen Brown and Jason Tatum and Kemba Walker going forward. If you wanted to trade one of those three, obviously they probably want to trade Kemba Walker before they traded Brown or Tatum. But the bottom line is they got to do something to fix that front court because you look at it going forward in the Eastern Conference. If you're the Celtics, you got to contend with Philly and Joel Embiid. You got to contend with Miami. Pardon me, not Miami, Milwaukee and Giannis. And you look at that three-headed monster right now with the Brooklyn Nets. These are the teams that the Celtics are going to have to deal with in order to get by to get to the NBA Finals. So it's going to be interesting to see how this pairing comes together. If you're the Celtics, you look at it, you've been consistently good, but consistently good has not been enough to get that coveted 18th Larry O'Brien trophy in the mantle case. And make no mistake about it, the Celtics have 17 NBA championships. Is tied with the Lakers for the most in NBA history. But if you look between when the Celtics won their last championship with Larry Bird in 1986, and then when they won their last NBA championship overall in 2008, the Los Angeles Lakers caught up immensely with the Lakers in the championship category to the point that now the Lakers are tied with the Celtics for the most championships in NBA history. And of course, for decades, this was something that the Celtics organization was able to hang their hat on. The fact that nobody could touch them in regards to NBA championships. So I think right now, the pressure is going to be on Brad Stevens to kind of, do it because say what you want about Danny Ainge. He did lead this team to a championship. And with that said, you know what? The expectations are still there for this Boston Celtics organization. I think this was a move where the Celtics wanted to make sure that they kept Brad Stevens. And like I said, there's a part two to this that I'm going to get to a little bit later on this evening. But the thing is this: what has Brad Stevens done as a head coach in the NBA to say, you know what, I'm going to give this guy this type of pull to run my front office? I mean, make no mistake about it. He has won games, but Brad Stevens has never got the Celtics to the NBA Finals, more or less win an NBA championship. And when you think about, coaches making that transition to the front office, typically, it's like the Red Auerbachs of the world. If the Spurs wanted to do it with Greg Popovich, Miami basically did it with Pat Riley. Coaches of that magnitude or that, cachet or whatever like that. But the bottom line is Brad Stevens has not won enough in the NBA to warrant that. So, I think this was a move out of desperation. Like I said, there's a part two to this. I'm definitely going to harp in on that with that. But with that said, this is going to be interesting. I think the pressures are going to be on Brad Stevens to show that he can do it now as an executive, finding more talent to put around Brown and Tatum, finding a head coach who is on the same wavelength as him, so to speak, and trying to get that 18 championship hung up in the TD Garden in Boston, Massachusetts. The Celtics definitely took a big step back this year. I mean, they were still able to make the postseason, but with where they have been in recent years, that ain't good enough. So this is a very, very, very important offseason that the Celtics are heading into. They feel that Brad Stevens is their guy going forward. Like I said, he has to find his head coach, but they have to find the pieces to put on this club. And most importantly, if the Celtics do not, and I repeat, do not find a way to fix their front court woes in order to consistently contend with the big boys in the East, then you know what? It's going to be a mute point, and they can say whatever they want to say. I think that, they'll say that, Danny Ainge retired. I think it was like they agreed to disagree, mutually parted ways, whatever you want to call it. But I think Ainge got nudged out the door, and I think he will pop up once again in somebody's NBA front office sooner rather than later. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out for the Celtics going forward, but this was definitely a shockwave to the basketball world. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. And as previously mentioned, there is a part two to this that I will be discussing, kind of like meshing everything together. I will be talking about that later this evening. So please feel free to check that out. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. Take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.